Good to go. Okay. How's everyone doing? It's fine. Monday. Good. So as you know, Jesse is on vacation this week. So he's in San Francisco. So we're trying not to, get his attention. Well, we want to make sure he's left alone. Not in a bad way. I just want to make sure we're not annoying. So I'm Jesse this week. I just have like a couple things to remind you guys about. This is all going to be in Slack as well. And this is all stuff you've mostly heard before, besides just a couple reminders. If you have questions, let me know. First of being, we are looking to update the website a little bit with some data about all you guys, your resumes, your GitHub profiles, your social media handles if you have them, that sort of thing. So I created a form and I put it in Slack a while ago. It's going to be back in there. It'd be great if you could fill it out. And just kind of let us know. It's pretty simple. Most of the fields are optional, so you can just kind of go through and put in what you'd like or what you'd like on the website. And then when we get a chance, we'll actually go through and update all of that. There's also a spot for a headshot. If you don't want to put one there, we'll just use the one we already have of you. And we're actually going to have somebody come in and take some professional ones eventually. So, yeah. Okay, cool. And then, yeah, just fill that out.
You resent it or you start?
I will send this Slack message right now with all of this information. So it's got the announcement doc, the forum, and then also something about some of that we talked about. So that should be all in there. So next, a reminder about the one-to-one pair programming for the capstone. The spreadsheet is also in that message I sent. Just kind of a reminder to take advantage of it. I don't know how many people have that, because there's a bunch of people in there, but definitely take use of that. There's a bunch of Calendly links in there if you're interested in hooking up with an instructor or myself or Jesse or really anyone else on the staff here. Tell you the capstone Linda's in there. So just really take advantage of that. As we're getting closer here, my main thing this week has been planning graduation, which is really exciting. Yeah, already. So we're looking to kind of set up an event for that. We've been doing a little planning for that last week, so it's really exciting. So just kind of get your mind in that capstone. Yeah, no, not yet, sadly. Honorary degree. And then also the capstone forms, I know Kelly asked about that this morning. It was a good question. I hadn't really thought about it. They're still on Classroom, but they'll still be being assigned to you guys. So use them. If you'd like to use them, there's a lot of good information there about blog posts, reminders if you're kind of looking for a checkpoint for yourself. But we're not really going to grade them as we did before. So just sort of as a kind of reminder to you guys, you don't have to, but definitely if you'd like to. Cool. Okay. Also, so I have a poll of you guys, people who are here. I sent out all of your individual GitHub for Education pack codes along with the links about a week ago. Who is using them? I just have I'm just trying to get a general consensus. You guys, okay? No, that's okay. Yeah, so that's a good question. That's why I asked. So it's basically just a big resource pool. I mean, I don't know if you guys probably have more experience. I don't really have access to it. Do you want to kind of say what your experiences with it are?
Well, it's just a bunch of free programs or deeply discounted programs and tools and stuff that you have access to. One of them is actually a free domain through Namecheap, which is for a year, which is definitely something you want to take advantage of if you haven't set up a website yet.
Yeah. Tam, do you have anything to add or?
I started using Bootstrap Studio.
Okay.
It's like offline Bootstrap thing that you can take websites more or
Awesome.
It's really helpful. You can visualize it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff. I honestly haven't been in there. We've been trying to get this stuff for 3 months, and this woman finally got back to us. They've been great though. So it's a really awesome service. GitHub is obviously, you guys know GitHub, and they do a really good job with their education stuff, and we finally have it now. If you need me to regenerate your link for whatever reason it's not working, definitely let us know, and I can do that for you. And yeah, you guys found them useful, I'm assuming. Okay, good. And just sort of as a heads up to you guys, like I said, they did take us a while to get. So sort of if you're wondering why, our plan is for the next cohort, when that does happen, we're looking to get them out at the beginning of class, along with that orientation stuff, just kind of as a heads up. Cool. So then just sort of miscellaneous reminders here. Class is going to be at the Terracite Room tomorrow. And then obviously we're not here on Thursday because it's July 4th. I hope everyone has a really good holiday. I will check in on that, whatever that is that you said about July 3rd. I haven't heard anything about that, but it wouldn't surprise me, so I'll look. Yeah. Do there any questions about any of that, or any questions I can answer about really anything in general? Here all week, so Slack me. Okay. All yours.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you're back. You got me for another week. It's a short week. Who's excited about sales?
Yeah.
That's great. We're not doing it.
Oh, no way. No way.
We are going to do Meteor instead.
No, Max, come on.
And so here's why.
Is he playing?
I'm not. I know I've been talking up sales. So I dove into Sales.js yesterday and all day today. And as a full stack developer, I got maybe a fifth of the way into it as far as I thought I was going to. The main issue with sales is it sets you up for a huge app. And that's fine if you are building out a huge app. The issue with sales is that when you generate the basic files, the file structure, and I can show you guys, is ginormous. And so while I was going through it and learning it, because I haven't used it myself, what I ran into was I was realizing that there's no way we can cover a full app in 3 days in just sales. And so when you look at the sales structure, I do want to pop it open only because there are a couple things I need to screen share in Zoom before I do that. And I need to open open this. You mute. Okay. So if you pop open this file structure, you see that there are a lot of files in here. And these are actually all folders. So when you start digging into it, you have things like controllers. And when the reason I want to go over this is because there is an important concept that sales uses that Meteor does not. And that's called MVC, Model View Controller. And we've already started to do this a little bit with our chat room app, our to-do app, right? So the important thing to remember with MVC is it breaks your code up into 3 sections. The model, which is how you structure all of your database. The view, which is all of your front end stuff. We were using jQuery with something like sales. They have their own templating engine. They use EJS, which is what we spent a little time covering. EJS is very tightly integrated with sales. And then your controller, and your controller is essentially your API endpoints, right? The difference with a controller is that controllers not only do your API logic and connect your front end to your model, your view to your model, they also will serve your view as well. So when data comes in, it will interface with the controller. So this is great, but when we start diving into how many files are in the base Sales.js app, we start to realize that, wow, there is a lot going on here. Even when we just look at the views and the pages, we start getting into how many different files are in sales. So I decided to shift to Meteor. The reason I decided to shift to Meteor is because it covers all the same functionality as sales. So we're still gonna do a full stack app. We're still gonna dive into accomplish the same goals as a model view controller. The other reason why I wanted to jump into Meteor a little bit is Meteor has a very basic integration with React. And so the other benefit of doing Meteor is that you guys are going to get a very intro level to React as well, and how we access data in React through the database and all of that kind of stuff. So we have 2 options. One of the options is to do another to-do app. The difference is we're going to be using Meteor, we're going to be using Mongo. The other benefit of that is that you guys can kind of draw parallels, right? We already have one working to-do app, So we can start drawing connections between the two of them and start going, okay, I understand how this stores in the database when we use Express, and here's how we do it in the Meteor version. The other option that we have of doing is building a new app from scratch, doing a whole front end again. And one of the things that I know you guys love doing is filling out feedback for the course. Well, as instructors, we also fill out a lot of feedback, and one of the big issues is it all goes into a giant Google spreadsheet. So the issue with a giant spreadsheet is that when I'm going to bed and trying to read all the feedback, I'm scrolling on my phone 1,000 times and I'm going, wait, who said that? And I'm scrolling back to see, and I wait, did I scroll up a row? Or it's just a giant spreadsheet for us. The other thing that would be super helpful is we would like to be able to track your progress over time. So right now, when we fill out the weekly feedback for the students, it again goes in a giant spreadsheet, and it becomes very hard to track your progress. So I was thinking of creating an app that would, to start, let instructors sign in, require a sign in, have some data security along with that, make it so instructors could create new students, they could submit feedback on those students, and then they could go in and do a view on those students as well. So they could see the feedback just by student or for the entire week. On top of that, if we have time, come Wednesday probably, we could go into that app and also make a student side of it as well. So you guys could submit your feedback in there on individual instructors on how the week went, and then we can design a whole interface around that data. So totally fine, whichever one you decide you would like to do. The to-do app I know sounds a lot more boring, but there are a lot of reasons to do the to-do app, mainly so you guys can see the parallels that you're drawing. Meteor is going to be different, just as sales would be different. But the core concepts here are drawing parallels, right? And going, okay, this is how we did it in Express, and this is how we're going to do it in Meteor. So with all of that said, let's take a vote.
I have a question.
Sure.
So it's sales and Meteor, they're just frameworks that
Yes.
you're going to be showing us how to use. Okay.
Just like Express is a framework for Node, Meteor and Sales both run on top of Node, so they are going to be fully JavaScript oriented. They're just slightly different ways of accomplishing it. Everything that I have seen of Sales is people who use Sales are building larger apps. They have multiple developers working on it. They want a little bit more control.
And you're saying Meteor is it has more basic integration, so we wouldn't have all of those files.
Correct. We're starting more from scratch with Meteor in terms of files, but we also get a lot of integrations from Meteor that are much easier to use than Sales.
Okay. And then the third option would be just to start completely from scratch and then integrate with the Google information that's going into the spreadsheets.
If we wanted, we wouldn't necessarily integrate with Google. We want to create an interface separate from Google. So it doesn't matter. We're going to build a front end in whatever we pick, but basically our three options would be if we wanted to make this app from scratch, we would either do it in Express, we would do it in Meteor, or we would do it in Sales.
Oh, okay. So either way, it's going to be from scratch. It's just a matter of which framework.
Correct. And so that is a third option. If you guys would like to build this app in Express because you say, hey, I'd like to get some more experience with Express, that's completely fine. The reason why we wanted to introduce you to another framework is because it is very common to use a framework in the real world, in the working world. Meteor actually is slightly more popular than Sales. But either way, Node is starting to catch up in the back end. It's only been around for a couple years. And so because of that, it isn't super popular in the workforce yet. However, more and more companies are starting to use Node. because of all of its benefits, like asynchronous coding and it being faster, and the fact that you get to write JavaScript on the back end and on the front end. And that is of tremendous value. I can't tell you how great it is to write some code in the back end and realize, hey, this code shouldn't be in the back end. I really want this code to run in the front end. So I can literally just cut my code right out of Node and put it in my front end and have it run there as well. So there are definitely benefits to Node. So I will put all three options on the table. Meteor, To Do, Meteor, well, let's do this. Would you rather do the to-do list app so we can draw parallels and kind of constrain that into maybe just one night? Or would you rather do the student feedback app? Okay, so vote for to-do app. Okay, vote for student feedback app.
Anything that would make that process easier.
Kate
voted for the student.
Okay,
feedback.
I think Will is sending me death threats over here if I don't pick that.
Keep me really comment. I think like, you know, this do app, I think there's probably a lot of similar stuff that I think you guys can draw from there. So maybe it's like an office hours project or extra project.
Sure. Sure, cool. Would anyone like to do Express over Meteor?
Can I tell you why I'm leaning towards Meteor?
Mhm.
Because although I like your point that using Express, it would give us more experience with it, but I'm leaning towards Meteor because you mentioned that it has basic integration with React. So I'm kind of interested to see where
Sure.
that would go.
Sure. Okay, so we're gonna dive in with Meteor. Okay. Tonight is definitely a follow along night. I am going to try and let you guys write as much as the code as possible. Definitely also use Drew while he's here, because Meteor, there's going to be a lot of different places we get stuck. We're going to be working across a lot of different files. So Meteor is a little different because it is truly a full stack framework. So a lot of times you hear framework, right? And you go, okay, I understand that, just add some features onto some code or some language I'm already working in. Well, Meteor is a little different because it's very opinionated. And what we mean by opinionated is that Meteor has a de facto way of doing it, right? So when we were working with Express, we could have picked MySQL, we could have picked Mongo, we could have picked Postgres. All of them have their pros and their cons. With something like Meteor, Meteor goes Mongo. That's it, no questions asked. We're gonna work with Mongo. Doesn't matter if you'd like to use something else, our right answer is Mongo. And because they have that super tight integration, think of that as Apple versus Microsoft, or Microsoft or Apple versus Google, right? Apple has that very tight ecosystem, and because of that, the products seem to work better together. And so that's the model Meteor went for. So to get started, we're going to install Meteor. So we're going to go to meteor.com. And we're going to click on the giant Get Started button. And they have a curl command for us to run. If you're on Windows, good luck. You can install Chocolatey and then install it with Chocolatey. On Mac, it's going to be much, much easier. So we're going to just copy and paste this command in. And I have a very old version of Meteor installed, so mine is going to start out by removing my old one. And then it's going to install the new one. So we're going to give this a second. You guys are probably going to finish before I am.
I'm on the page where it says install. Where do I click? There's OS Linux.
Yeah, so go ahead and copy that command. And then you're going to go to your terminal and paste that in there. The other great thing about Meteor is it manages all the configuration for us. So we're not going to have to set up a Mongo server. We're not going to have to worry about ports. We're not going to have to dive into Docker. Meteor is going to manage all of that for us. So when we turn on the Meteor server, it's also going to turn on Mongo for us. Okay, so Meteor installed for me. Everyone doing all right?
Still installed.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change into my CIC repo. And I'm going to go into my folder. And I'm going to just quickly remove 2 files that I have in here just so I don't commit, so I don't run into issues. Okay, and then I am going to run a new command, meteor space create, and then we are going to call this feedback. I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to download a whole bunch of files. And what this is basically, oh, I lied. Instead of running meteor create, if you did run that, just hit Control-C to cancel it, hopefully. There we go. And then rmrf feedback to delete that app. What I want to do is I want to create my Meteor app a special way. So what I'm going to do is tell it, instead of just Meteor create, I'm going to do -- react. And what that's going to do is Meteor actually is not opinionated on the front end. So Meteor says if you'd like to use Angular, you can use Angular. If you would like to use Vue.js, which is the new popular thing, you can use Vue.js. They also have their own templating engine called Blaze. But what we're going to do is say the -- react on our create, which is going to say, hey, install React and all the dependencies that we need with it. So going to rerun that command, meteor create space -- react. I'm going to call it feedback, and that's going to be the name of our app.
Where are you doing that?
In my CIC repo.
Okay.
In my folder in my CIC repo. Okay, and now it says it's up and running. So I'm going to cd into feedback, and I'm going to run a command called meteor without anything after it. And what that's going to do is it's going to turn on the server for me, and it's going to build my project.
Okay, wait a minute. Do we have access to that CIC repo folder?
It should be whatever you have cloned. So wherever you commit your code to get it into the sandbox.
Just the same, just sandbox. I mean, then there's folders, individual folders.
That's where I'm working. Yep.
So now I have, oh wait a minute, I'm a little lost now. So what are you doing right now?
So all we did is we CD'd into wherever our repo is, our sandbox. You know, obviously go into your name, your folder, and then we're going to run this command, meteor create -- react feedback, and feedback is just the name of the app. Yep. So I'm just working in the sandbox.
Oh, because it's not CIC.
Yeah, everyone will have a different repo name, so just CD into wherever your sandbox folder is. And if you would prefer to do this in Visual Studio Code, that's also completely fine. I am going to switch there in 1 second.
Okay.
I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't.
That's fine. Yeah, it doesn't really matter where we're at.
I mean,
just wanted to
well, no,
get
actually, I want to, right, but I want to do it so that I can.
So then definitely you want to do that in the repo. So what I would do is just rm space -rf and delete your feedback, and then CD into your directory and rerun the meteor into the Oh, wow, okay. Then you want to CD into feedback and get.
No, freak.
So if we look at where you are, I'm gonna run PWD, and you're on.
So
just-
now I can just get in it, right?
Yes, because you're in well, so if you open this, it actually created a folder inside of that called feedback, and your whole project's gonna be in there. So I would just maybe move that to the desktop and then delete that folder. And then you can get it inside that folder and
No.
push it, all of that.
So that's the document. You didn't need to.
I'm wondering if it's because it has that slash at the end of it.
This,
Yeah.
it did that for now.
So let's ls. And we have feedback app. Okay, so CD into your feedback app. And ls again. And all of that's right. So CD back up one more level. We're gonna try that command again. So RM space RF. Dash RF. And then space, and then feedback app, enter. And then meteor space create. Dash react, back, feedback. Feedback. App, if you want to call that, or and then enter. Let's see without the slash, it is up without the errors.
So this naming it.
Yeah, that's
That's why
creating
it
a
messed
folder
up.
for you.
So now, or maybe not.
Okay. So I'm down on the desktop.
You installed Meteor, didn't you? Is anyone else getting errors when creating their Meteor app?
I did when I didn't send feedback first time. I thought I could just do meteor dash create react.
Okay.
And that didn't work, but it didn't work when I did feedback at the end.
I wonder if your NPM is installed incorrectly. Try RMRF, dash RMF, sorry. And then remove it one more time. Remove it over.
Feedback.
Or enter. And then do sudo. And then the same meteor create. Dash react, and then do
That's all I need.
and then your manifest. I think your NPM is installed. They don't want you doing
I
that.
don't like that.
Meteor's like, no, that's a hack. I tried. I did try. Just do the Meteor create. Do the Meteor create dash react.
This one? Yeah. Just my box.
And then call feedback. We're gonna give you a bunch of errors. Let's see
You know,
the
when we're on command line,
CD
and
into
there's a
the
space in the
directory
file,
and then
and
turn
I'm
on the server. If the server's gonna work.
backward slash.
Yeah, not the one that we're used to mostly, but the one that's on like the top right. I think.
Because I'm doing my CD, careers and code, and I'm it's careers and
Try
code
this.
sandbox, and I'm trying to get to this folder.
And then
What is your tab?
if it turns on, fine, then we're just gonna
Oh,
ignore
wait,
it.
it says. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not on. So we're there.
You are all kinds of screwed up. I've never seen.
Thank you.
There's no such file in directory.
Your Meteor really screwed up.
I was trying to distract.
All I did was install it like from
Now it
just
wants
like
to
the
let me drag and drop.
whatever.
Yeah,
Oh, you know what, it
should not
was,
be-
okay, you were kind of right.
We're gonna try and reinstall Meteor.
Wrong backslash.
Maybe the first
I was
Meteor
supposed
install
to
like
put the
that.
backslash space, and then I forgot the space.
Maybe like something screwed up in the initial download, so hopefully reinstalling it will not make it do this. Okay. So we're good here. Actually, I'm gonna just quit your terminal because sometimes it needs a change. Your desktop, your React. Okay, come on, Mitty. No errors, no errors. What? No errors, no whammies, no whammies.
Is my MPS bad? Can I uninstall? Or is that bad?
I would install it.
Great.
Okay, and then we're gonna go back up to your desktop and RF. We tried it.
Sorry. Check out my slide.
If this doesn't work, we have
Is
to
that-
install. I think no, because
They
no is
actually
how
have
you
a
get
slash
NPM.
on that side. Can someone move their purse off of the floor?
Once you have it
No.
installed.
Thank you. Okay, I think that gets us. How's that? A little aggressive there, back here.
Alright.
A little
Ready?
aggressive.
It's nice having.
Okay.
All right, so now.
Okay.
Oh, we're-
So I cleared your NPM cache. Miracle that that worked, especially considering it needed a sudo command. But it should be up and running now. Yeah. It might be a little slow the next time you run a package.
Maybe it was like a. I think I can tell stuff.
Don't know. Clearing the cache seemed to do it though. So node.funky.
I wonder if then it's like, oh, there's changes that
Can
you
you help?
did.
Well, just a question, so we're in Sandbox, should we be in our personal folders within the Sandbox? Okay.
Any other questions? Does everyone have an app is running at localhost 3000, my favorite port?
Yeah.
What? Okay, did I miss
Why would I
something?
have-
How you do?
He said we should have an app. Okay, now you can see.
Should I back away slowly or do you need help?
Be careful. It's all there.
Let's look. Maybe it's trying to commit all the files and see how much it is. If we scroll down a lot, none of those are no module files. Let me look at mine and see what that does. Maybe we'll fix that as a cost. All right,
Nope, just type it.
last chance for help.
You said something about we should be at localhost 3000?
Yeah, it should say app running at HTTP localhost 3000.
I think I missed something. I'm in my sandbox, in my folder.
Did you mean your create?
No, I haven't done it. So, right here's media.
Yeah.
Venus just got me by
Space dash react. Space and then call it feedback. And that's going to create your Meteor project for you. And then you're going to CD into the feedback folder because it made it for you, and then just run Meteor, and that's going to get the project fired.
Yep. CD into the feedback folder.
Yep.
And then that's.
Yep.
How do you delete it? How do you not? How do you not? How do you not?
How do you not do it? Just don't do it. Don't.
Because I didn't commit it yet. Because I know
Yeah.
I didn't commit it yet. How do I not? I'm not without whatever.
Well, you may have created it over 1,000 times. Well, the other thing is, are you in the right? Yeah, you're in the right one. Okay, well, give me a second. Let me try on my side and see. We might have to clean something up and get ignored. Okay, so now that we're here, I'm going to switch. The reason why I started in my terminal was because I didn't have a project created yet, right? So instead of opening up Visual Studio Code and working in a terminal in there, I personally don't like to go into VS Code until I have my project folder created. So now that I do, I'm going to just do open dot, and that's going to take me to wherever I am, wherever my file path was in Finder, and I can just drag and drop that onto VS Code. Now VS Code is going to pop open my editor, and I do only have 19 changes. So something is wrong in GitLand. I may have some files set globally in my git ignore, where basically I say always don't commit these certain kinds of files. So that's why there could be a couple discrepancies. Okay, so now that we're in here, it's always a good idea to commit what you have as first commit, right? And the reason why we want to get in that practice is if something breaks, we can always go back to our git and roll back to that version. So first I'm going to pull because, I didn't mean to actually do that, because everyone else may have committed some different files. So I'm going to pull, I'm going to say first commit. I'm going to stage them all and commit them. And then I'm going to push that up before any of you guys have a chance. Okay, now I'm pushed up there. So all my files are there. If I need to roll back, I can. Okay, so we did all of that. I want to take a look at my starter code. So the first place I'm going to look is my client. And I'm going to look at my main.jsx. JSX is the file extension that, that React uses for all of their front-end code. I'm also going to pop open main.html.
What section?
What?
The JSX is a what section that React uses?
It's just the file extension. File extension.
Oh.
So .html is a file extension. JSX is a file extension. And that's how you can recognize that it is React code that's going to be running. And I'm also going to start a live share here. If you guys don't want to join this link and follow along, that's also completely fine. But if you want to hop open in this and see my code, you can also do that. Okay, so we have our title here called feedback. I don't really want my title to show up as feedback. I want it to show up as CIC feedback app. So I'm going to just change that. And we have our ID React target here. So this is all the HTML we are going to write. We're basically going to create one semi-empty HTML file for React to latch into. So what we do in our main.jsx code is we say, hey, get document.getElement by ID, And that ID that we want to grab is React target, which is here. And we want to render out our app code into that. So our app is probably going to be in our imports UI. And how do I know that? Well, because we're importing it, right? We've had experience with imports before, right? With Jake teaching. So if we look at imports UI app, we can go into our app. And here we have our div with a H1, welcome to Meteor, and it renders out hello and info. Okay, well, where's hello and info? Well, that's in the // so in our same directory under hello and info. So I'm gonna pop open hello, and we have some code in here. Okay, we're going really deep in the code here. Let's see what this is doing. So I'm gonna open up a terminal. And I am going to run the command Meteor, and that's going to fire up a project for me. And then I'm going to go to Chrome, and I'm going to look at localhost 3000. Okay, so we have a very basic interface here that says you press the button 0 times, and it says click me. And if I click on that button, it increments. And then there are a bunch of links down here. So I'm going to go back to my React code and let's see how that's working under the hood. So this is a great example of how you guys can dive into example code and kind of piece together how React is working without having to go through a whole tutorial or learn all the ins and outs. And the point of this is definitely not to learn React. We're just going to look at the basics of React. And then Joey is going to jump into React a little bit more. But basically what's happening here is we have a button that's doing an on-click. Well, we've seen on-click before. We've used that in jQuery. Okay, and it's saying this.increment. Okay, well, hey, look, there's some function up here called increment. So what's increment doing? It's using this function called setState. SetState is this magical thing in React where you can store all of your variables. So it is adding 1 to counter. So because we are using state, we look at down here and it says this.state.counter. So whenever counter changes, it's automatically going to re-render this for us and update that number in the interface. So we can change the counter this.state.counter +1 to +2 if we wanted to. And when we jump back into our Meteor code, notice we didn't have to hit refresh. We can just click that button and it's adding 2 every time we click the button. So that's the basic of our app, right? Does anyone not have this screen?
If it's not running in your VS Code terminal, you might have to Control-C in the other terminal first and then restart it.
Yes, so 2 Meteor apps cannot be running on the same port at the same time. So you do want to Control-C it out of the terminal that you were in and fire it up in VS Code. Or it's also fine to run it in that terminal too. It doesn't have to be in VS Code.
I don't know where I am.
Okay.
Right now.
Okay, so you're in your feedback app. So what we have,
I am.
yeah. So to confirm that, you can do CWD, enter, and that's going to show you the long path of where you are.
All right. Because what I thought maybe they would skip something. So I don't know if I created a Meteor inside of another Meteor and then keep that. And I'm not exactly sure. I guess I could just put this in.
So you LS here, and you can see all of these files in here. That's all of your Meteor files. That's what Meteor created for you. So you are good. You didn't do anything wrong. So now we just have to kick off the Meteor server, and in order to do that, we're just going to type in Meteor. And that's going to fire up the server, and then 1 second, you should see localhost 3000 in your terminal, and then you can open that up. Then you'll open it up. Who else is thinking? Stop. Well, that's why we are here.
Save computers from
So sometimes the best way to start the day is to start. Yep. Okay, where do you want this to be? So on your desktop?
Yeah.
So we're gonna go to your desktop, we're gonna LS, and you don't have anything in your already. So Meteor, well, Meteor's gonna make the directory for you. That's a good note. When we run Meteor create, it creates a folder for us and then puts all of our code in there. So in case you were wondering where that folder came from, Meteor is doing that for us. Meteor create dash React, and then we are going to say feedback. Most projects do. It depends. Okay, so now we have our folder. We're going to create into it. We're going to open it. We're going to tell the other code that we want to open it. Open it. So we're going to go up here. And we're going to go to this. Yeah. It says there's no source of control here. Right? So you're going to get into stuff. Well, that's okay. So we're going to get it in. So if you wanted to add your remote, if you could do that.
Yeah, we took a break again.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just Meteor.
It's a really hard one to remember. If you'd like to turn on a Meteor server, Meteor.
Honestly, should be Meteor.
So now you want to add your remote. And how can I find it? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm good. Yeah, really real. Let's just, yep, good.
Okay, we good?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're all ready.
So, Meteor, just like any other node-based thing, uses NPM. So what do you think the first NPM package I want to use is? Moment's the closest. Okay, so maybe that was a trick question that I'm realizing now. We have always used NPM on the back end. So Moment and FS and Body Parser and Express itself, those are great examples of back-end packages. But we're now braving into the great world of front-end NPM packages. So we're going to install Bootstrap. Okay, so my Meteor server started, but I want to stop it for just 1 second. So I'm going to hit Control-C, and I'm going to run Meteor NPM. Meteor has its own version of NPM that saves a lot of hassles. So I'm going to Meteor NPM install. I'm going to do my --save, and I'm going to install Bootstrap. Okay, I now have Bootstrap installed, and I am going to do a quick search for Bootstrap Meteor and grab a quick link to import my CSS. Yeah, and we'll see why in a second. I need to do that in my client folder. Okay. There's one other command we need to install. Because Bootstrap uses Sass, we also need to tell our Meteor server to use Sass as well. So instead of doing Meteor npm install, Meteor supports npm, and it's where you get the majority of your packages. What we're going to use here is Meteor add, And Meteor Ad is Meteor specific packages that might not be available in NPM, but might do something differently with Meteor, which is why they have a separate package manager. So we're going to Meteor Ad, and we are going to grab the most popular CSS package, which is 47:CSS. I'm going to try and move this up on my screen so you guys can see the spelling of that. The command we're running right is that this Meteor Ad 47:SCSS. And you can also join the remote share as well and see my terminal in there.
Do we need to grab that import for the CSS?
You need to just add it. We'll import it in a second. So not yet.
Oh, just add it.
So when you say that you don't really use this on our big website, what do you mean, relatively speaking, between your big websites and your small websites? Like what's
Sure.
like big to me is Amazon.
Great question. Amazon would not use Meteor.
Meteor. What about sales? Or is that still too gigantic?
It could. Amazon most likely uses several different frameworks, but Amazon would definitely be more suited for sales than Meteor.
Okay. We're talking that big.
We're talking big. We're talking maybe over 1,000 users.
Okay.
So if you're doing a little project, the sandbox or your capstone is a great example. Your capstone would be fine to use Meteor. It's when you get to having over 1,000 users that I personally draw a line in the sand and go, maybe Meteor isn't quite right for you. Totally possible to make it work with 10,000, 100,000 users, but maybe not the best starting point if you're planning on that massive scale. Okay, does everyone have Meteor Ad 47:SCSS run?
Yes.
Okay, so we have to do no more SCSS. We can use SCSS however we want. We don't have to use any file watchers. We don't have to have it on in the background. We don't have to have it compiling. That is the magic of Meteor, is Meteor goes, we'll manage that for you. You threw in the package, you want to use SCSS, you want to use Sass, you go for it, you have it installed, we know how to do it.
That's beautiful.
So, what we are going to do is, I just want to make sure I am keeping up with my code. Okay, so we need to, we just added the package, right? We just said, hey, I want access to Bootstrap code and I want you to be able to compile that SCSS code. Now we need to tell our app to use it. So I'm going to go to my app.jsx, and up at the top here, I'm going to copy in a line of code that tells Bootstrap, hey, we want to import that. Kelly, before you copy that, let me just make sure it works.
Okay.
So I'm going to fire up my Meteor server.
How do I get those files showing that you have on the website?
Just click on your file explorer on the top left. And it did not like that. I believe I just need it without the S. Okay, now let's see. Oh no, we broke something. Don't follow along quite yet until I have it working. Rename that in the client folder and add the line below it. Okay. So I put that in the wrong spot. I apologize. We're not going to put it in app.jsx. We are going to rename. Meteor already created a main.css file for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to rename that to main.scss. So we basically just converted that from a regular CSS file to a Sass file. And what's that?
Oh, no.
You have a main.css. You're going to rename it to .scss.
Did you pull these? These came in with Meteor or?
Came in with Meteor.
I still don't have the files.
So if you go to your file system, we click up here. We haven't opened your project yet. So we are going to just go file open. And we're going to find where you put it. Okay. So we're going to open that. And now you should have all the files.
Oh, okay.
Yep, you created the meteor, just didn't open it. Yeah. Everyone good for now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had to go and see.
Okay, where are you at? Okay, you have Meteor installed. Okay, so we're going to CD into your directory. And then Meteor. Oh, not quite yet. Meteor space K. And then space dash dash react. And then space and then go ahead and type in feedback. And that's going to create your whole Meteor project for you. And then CD into that folder.
No, I already got it.
If you okay, and now your server's going to be running. So if you go to local mode, we have to refresh the page. So open up a new tab on local host 3000. Okay, now your server's running. Now we need to get bootcamp installed and yeah, and then Meteor. Okay. And install. Dash save. And then bootcamp. And then we're also going to install SPSS, but we're going to do Meteor as instead. And then we're adding because it's a Meteor package, it's not an NPM package. And we're going to do 4 FOUR 7 all one word. No space.
That green color.
All
It's bad for accessibility.
Terrible. So shift. Yes, that one, and then SPSS. Right, thanks. Okay. I hope that Drew can get you caught up. And once that's done, we're going to rename your main CSS file to open up the package. Rename
Just
your client name. Rename main.css to main.scss. Enter. And then go ahead and pop that open and and then that top line is what you want to type in.
Got it.
And if you get something,
The same, but a little uglier.
I don't know. It looks like you're caught up. Okay, so Control C here.
Oh, you need semicolon after.
Yes, Meteor is definitely a server. Control C. And then you can do this. I'll let you guys work.
Why did it make it look ugly? Or
Uglier? No, it's not uglier. It just needs a little bootstrap class love. So what we're going to do, we're going to come in here. Now, a little quirk of React is React does not use class. React uses this thing called class name. And the reason why React uses class name is because Bootstrap also uses classes. And when when React uses classes, they don't mean CSS classes. They actually mean JavaScript classes. So what we're going to do is we're going to say class name equals container. And we're going to go to our hello.jsx, and we're going to add a class name of BTN and maybe BTN success. And the reason why we're doing that, we're going to delete this code, but we just want to make sure that our Bootstrap is working. So we're going to hop back over to our Chrome, and you notice that it is indented properly, and our button is not quite as ugly. Okay, so that means we just got Bootstrap installed. Okay, so where do we go from here? We have our Meteor server running. We don't really know if the database is working yet, but that's okay. We have it up and running.
We didn't make a list.
We didn't make a list. Would that be helpful?
I did.
I think it could hurt.
Would you like to share your list for us to go off of? Oh, you created the list.
Well, kind of what you were talking about earlier.
Okay, well let's create a list.
So you said.
Hold on. Oh, come on. There we go. Let me share it with everyone so everyone can get in there.
It's not like a list, like all things you have to do, but it's the things you wanted.
Your disappointment.
I'm sorry.
Google, would you like to? Oh, okay.
So we have all
The
the JSX.
JSX file should be created for you automatically in the client folder or the import folder. They are in imports UI. What is it called? Dot. In imports UI? Oh, go to imports UI. Okay, and I'm going to share this link. I'm putting this in resources. And I'm giving everyone edit access. Okay, so what do we want our to-do app to do? I'm sorry, our feedback app.
Instructors to be able to sign in. Create students. Submit feedback on students. Filter view by student and filter view by week.
Hey, what's the command to install Bootstrap?
Meteor.
It is
Install.
Mm-mm.
Save.
Meteor npm
Oh, yeah.
install dash save
That
bootstrap.
was close.
Very close.
3 letters.
Create feedback on students, filter feedback
By day and week.
by day and week, and then filter feedback by student.
I said
Well, what else do we need to do?
data.
Sure, save information in database. Maybe we can just lump all of CRUD into that, because we probably need to be able to delete feedback, probably need to be able to update the feedback and read it in the interface. Hey, an interface. We need an interface.
We need date stamps and everything.
Sure, we can do timestamps.
So So this is gonna do the API calls for us? Is that what you said?
We'll find out.
Do you want to include a form with the questions to submit from interface? So why not? Or is there a way to integrate Google Forms with like other non-Google things?
There is.
That sounds too complicated.
Yeah, we're not going to jump quite to integrations yet. Anything else? I don't know who stored assignments is, but not quite yet. We're gonna, that might be a little ambitious for this. We're just gonna start with feedback and then we'll do assignments. We're not building a whole learning management system like Blackboard or Google Classroom or something like that. Although in theory, we could if we wanted to.
You can invest class over.
Anything else people can think of based off of the chat room app, based off of the to-do app that we already did? It's okay if you may or may not know if it's Meteor based, because we want to think about objectives, not how we're doing those objectives, right? So what do we want the app to do, not how are we going to get the app to do it?
We need to separate weekly feedback from the daily feedback. Have a way to do that.
Yeah, let's see how far we get today and then figure out where we want to be tomorrow. Sound good? Okay. So we are going to, first thing we're going to do, yeah. We're going to make it instructor only for now. And then maybe towards the end of the week, we can add in students as well and start talking about the different views, because the student's going to see different a different interface than the instructor is, right? Okay. So instead of starting in the front end, we're going to do something a little different this time. We're going to actually start all the way on the other side in the database. So because Meteor uses Mongo, we are going to go create our first Mongo collection. So where we're going to go is, instead of the UI for the front end, we're going to go to the API. And you know what? While I'm here, I'm going to clean up some things. I'm going to delete this hello file, and I'm also going to delete info.js because we're not using those components. If we want to use those components, we can in a second. So we're going to delete them, and Meteor is surprisingly not cranky at us. But if we go to our React code and refresh it, we get a plain white screen. And the reason why we're getting that is because our app code is still trying to look for these files. So we're going to delete them out and delete them here. And we're going to save and go back, and we get our welcome to Meteor back, right? So we're just doing a little housekeeping because we don't need those files. So we are going to go to our API links.js, and they have something in here. I don't want links, right? So I'm going to just delete that as well. And I'm going to create a new file in my API, and I'm going to call it feedback. Okay. And what we're going to do is we are going to import Mongo from Meteor/Mongo. So what we're basically going to say is Meteor already has Mongo set up for us. Let's just use it. What we're also going to do is we are going to export. Now, the reason why we are going to export is because we want this feedback to be accessible in other files as well. Okay, what do we want to export? We want to export a object called feedback. And our feedback is going to be a new Mongo. Well, how's it know what Mongo is? Because we imported it right here. A new Mongo collection. Hey, collection, that sounds familiar. And what do we want to call that collection? We're going to call it feedback. Now, normally this would be a plural word, so we would say like tasks or users or something like that. But for right now, we are just going to create the collection. Okay, well, now we need to be able to use that collection. So we are going to go to our server.main.js. So we're jumping to their server-side code. The reason why we put our feedback.js in our imports API is because we want to be able to use our feedback on both the back end and in the front end, which is something different in Meteor, right? Before, we never had access to our Mongo table in our front end. So now we're changing that up. Now we actually have access to Mongo in our front end code. I'm going to see how that comes out in a second. But right now, we want to tell our server, hey, we need to import our feedback. So what we're going to do is there's a bunch of code in here. I'm going to just clear this out. And I'm going to clear this out. And I'm going to, instead of importing my links, I'm going to import my feedback from my import. So I am currently in the server folder. So I'm going to I'm going to go up one folder into my imports and then my API and then my feedback. Okay. And I can do .js just for good measure. Doesn't really matter. Okay. So we pulled in our file. So now our server knows, hey, go pull that in and go run that code. Go set up our Mongo collection for us. Now, this is all great, but we need the ability for React to be able to see our Mongo code. So what we're going to do is use a Meteor package to bridge the gap between them. And because it's a Meteor package, we're going to Meteor add instead of NPM. And the reason for that is this is specific to Meteor. This can't be used anywhere else. So we're going to Meteor add, and then the package is called React Meteor Data. And we're going to go ahead and run that command. And Meteor told us, hey, we already had that added, so that's fine. The reason we already had that added is because we did the -- React when we created our Meteor app. So Meteor was looking out for us and added that for us automatically. Okay, so now we are going to go back to our app.jsx code. And what we are going to do is wrap this code in a tracker. And what that tracker is going to do is pull the data from the database and give it to us in our component. I know this is confusing, but I'm going to do a full stack trace, a full trace of how the data is coming in and all of that as soon as we have it working. So I'm going to export default, and I'm going to say with tracker. Well, it's like, what's with tracker? I've never heard of with tracker. We need to import that. So we're going to import with tracker from, where are we going to grab it? We're going to grab it from Meteor, and we're going to grab it from that React Meteor data that we installed. Okay, now we're also, okay, so now we have our with tracker installed, and notice Visual Studio Code is connecting these two automatically for us. They understand that, hey, we're importing it from here. So what do we want to import with the tracker? We want to run some function. What's the function that we want to run? We want to return, so basically what data is going to be accessible in our app? We want to return an object called feedback. And our feedback is going to tasks.find. Hey, we know find. We used find with Mongo before. So this syntax is exactly the same. Okay, but we're not just going to find it. We're also going to do this command called fetch. And what fetch is going to do is it's going to put us in, it's going to put all of the, I'm sorry, not tasks, the feedback. It's going to put all the feedback into an array for us. Okay. That's great. Now, with tracker needs one more piece of information. Great, I got that data out. Now, where do you want to be able to access that information? I want to be able to access it in my app. Okay, so here's my app. My app's going to come up here, and we're going to change this. So this is great, but we're going to get a little bit fancier with React. So we're going to say class app extends component. And React is going to say, well, what's component? I don't know what component is. We need to import it. So we are going to import our component from React. Right? So this is all just set up. Now, in our component, it also needs it's a proper class. So it needs a curly brace after that, because we're going to define a bunch of functions that go in that class. So what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define something called render, and we are going to return out our container. Okay, it's a lot of code. We haven't even added anything to the database yet, but it's important to make sure that this is all still running, right? So we're going to run Meteor. We have the server booting up. We're going to go back here. We're going to refresh, and we don't have anything. Okay, well, that's a problem. So first place we're going to check is our console. And it says feedback is not defined. So let's go back to our code, and it's saying, hey, feedback, I don't know what feedback is. So we need to import the feedback. We need to link all of these files together. We need Meteor on the front end to know that feedback is a collection. So we are going to import feedback, and where are we going to import it from? API feedback, right? Because if we go to our API feedback, we notice in here we have the option to export. So we're exporting it so our front end can then import that object in. Okay, so we're going to save that. We're going to go back. We're going to refresh. We have our welcome to Meteor. So all we did is we just set up all the file connections here. So Mongo has access to the front end, and in our front end, we can get that data. Okay, well, all of that's great, but we want to see some data in the database, right? So instead of creating a form and diving right into there, let's just go directly to the terminal and add some data into Mongo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I still want to run my Meteor server, but what I'm going to do is create a new terminal, and I'm going to run Meteor Mongo. And what that's going to do is that's going to put us in the Mongo terminal, so we can run Mongo commands directly in here. And what we are going to run is DB, right, our basic database, and we're going to say feedback.insert. Okay, and it's going to say, well, what feedback do we want to insert? What do you want to put into the database? And so let's say we have student ID, and student ID is going to be ABC, and the timestamp is going to be a new date, and our message is going to be student is doing great. Okay, we're going to hit enter, and it says n inserted 1. So we can confirm that's in the database by doing our db.feedback.find all. And we're going to run that, and we get find all is not a function. We're just going to run it with find, and out comes back our data, right? And so we see it created an ID for us. It stored our ABC. It put in our date, and it stored our message. Great. Now let's get that showing up on the front end. So instead of doing a new API call, we have access to Mongo directly on the front end. So we are going to go here to our app.jsx, and before we render, what we are going to do is we are going to console.log log out this.props. Props is another thing in React, but basically props are what's getting passed into our component. Where's it getting passed in from? It's getting passed in right here. So I'm going to console log out this.props.feedback. And I'm going to go back to my console, and I'm going to refresh, and out comes an empty array. Okay, well, that's not quite what we wanted. We wanted our task to come back, right? And we know our task is in there because if we look in our terminal and rerun our db.feedback.find, we see that it's in there. So I want to hop over to my API code, and there's something that I did wrong. Can anyone spot the error? I did not that Mongo isn't capitalized. The issue is I capitalized the F in feedback, and I didn't capitalize it when I ran my query to add it into the database. So I'm going to rerun my insert command, except instead of a lowercase f, I'm going to use an uppercase f. Now when I jump into my terminal, we notice there's something in my console, in my browser. And if I pop that open, I have all of my data. So that was happening on the Mongo server. The Mongo server, thanks to the magic of Meteor, made it so I can access my database objects right there and add that and access that data. Okay, so now let's do, what do you think is next? Front end. What's specifically on the front end? Yeah, so we want to be able to just insert some feedback into our database, right? So let's do that. What we are going to do is we're going to set up a form. So we're going to go to our app JSX, and thanks to JSX being based in HTML, we're just going to write regular HTML here. So I'm going to do a form, and we are going to, in our form, let's grab some Bootstrap code, right? Because we want this to look pretty. So we're going to go here. We're going to go to our documentation. Nothing's new here. We're going to go to our forms. And we want a form group, and we want some form control, right? So we're going to go back here. We're going to do div class name equals form dash group, and we will do a label for, let's just do message, and we will do a input type equals input text input. I'm blanking. Input type email, type password. Okay, they don't even use it. We'll leave that out. But we do want to put our class name equals form dash control. And we probably want to do another input. Let's call this one student ID. And we'll save that, and let's just see what that looks like. So we'll pop back to our CIC feedback app, and we have our message and our student ID. Does anyone want to take a stab at getting those side by side? How would you get it side by side? Yep, you want to do it? That's it, you just told me the code. All right, what are we going to do? We have them in a container already. Okay, where do we put the row? Yep. Why do we put it there? So we're gonna end our div down here. Okay, and where are we gonna put our column? Yep. And where are we gonna close our column? Okay. Are we done? So we did one column. Now we have to do another column. We need two columns.
Yeah, they each need their own column.
Yep. And so when we refresh, well, that didn't work.
Wait. Can you go back to the?
Oh, you know what? I didn't. I have too many divs down here. Right, because now that's lining up. So there we go. Okay, so we need a submit button. So let's do another div class name row for that. And we'll do a div class name equals call. And let's make it centered. Anyone remember the CSS or the HTML for Bootstrap button? The class in particular?
Last name, submit.
BTN and then BTN default. And then we will say save feedback. Okay, go back to Chrome, we'll refresh. Because the world hates me tonight, that is also not working. Class name, BTN submit. We just had a button working. Primary. Well, that works. Okay, we'll use primary. Okay.
What about the instructor login?
We'll get to that in a second. So first step is we want to get a full CRUD operation working, right? We want to be able to see all the data, interface with the data, and make sure it's all safe and in the database. So what's the first step? So we have two options here. We can either make it so it can create things into the database, which is what we set up the form for, or in order to see if it's creating, we probably want to see the fact that it is creating, right? We want to do our read operation before we do our create. So let's do that. So underneath our form, we are going to drop down here. We're going to do a div class name equals row, where we will do a div, I'm gonna do a table maybe. Let's do a table. So I'm gonna go to Bootstrap. I'm gonna look up my table. I'm gonna grab this code. And really all it comes down to is a table, a T head, and my TRs, right? So let's do good practice to put everything in rows and columns in case you do need to break up into the grid label later. We'll do a table, class name of table, and that needs a T head. And what goes in our head is a table row. And our table row gets some THs, and we'll say student ID, and then maybe a TH of message, right? We need to display our data. And then down here, we will do our T body, and our table body is going to have a row. Now we're going to do something special in here. Instead of just doing one table row, we want to iterate over our data, right? We want one row for each piece of data. So instead of having to build out the HTML and jQuery like we have been before, we can build our HTML right in line. And that's kind of a cool thing that you can do with React. So what we're going to do is we're going to do these curly braces, right, that we've seen before. And we're going to say this dot props dot feedback. Okay, why are we going to call it feedback? Well, remember up here when we console logged out our feedback and that came back in an array? We're going to use that data. So what we're going to do is we're going to this.props.feedback, and we're going to do a function called map. And if you remember, map was built into JavaScript way back in the free code camp days. Map is essentially going to loop over all of our data. And what do we want it to return? We want it to give us access to feedback. And then in here, let's just console log out feedback. Let's see what we have in here. So I'm going to add in that console log, and I'm going to comment out this one. I'm going to go back to my browser and look at my code, and we have this object in here. And notice in this object, we already have our message and we already have our student ID. So let's hop back into here. And instead of just console logging out our feedback, we're going to return a new table row. Okay, and what do we want in our table row? We want a column, and we want our first column to be feedback.student ID. And we want another table, another column, table data. And what do we want in our table data? We want the message. So we're going to say feedback.student.message. We're going to save that. We're going to pop in here, and we have ABC message, student is doing great. Okay, so we have the R operation of CRUD down, right? So we have to take a minute and celebrate. I know you guys are swimming in this. I know it's a lot of new stuff, but it's a different way of accessing Mongo, but we have this in our database. Okay, so we're going to do the create operation, and then I'm going to give you guys a chance to run for the hills during a break instead of continuing through this. But not really. I expect you all to be back here. Okay, so let's get our create working. So in order to do that, we need the ability to add to our database. Well, in order to add to our database, we would normally have to make an API call, right? We would do the fetch, we would have to worry about cores, we would have to do the post, we'd have to set up body parser, we'd have to save it in the database, we'd have to do a find, we'd have to do all of that stuff. That sounds like a lot of work. What if we could just access the database on the front end? What if we could just throw in feedback right into our feedback collection? So we're going to do that. We're going to come in here, and instead of using jQuery to get our form values, we are going to use React. So we are going to use a package specifically from React called React DOM, and that should be automatically installed for us. If it's not, how would we install it? And npm install, except we're going to put Meteor in front of it. Yep, Meteor npm install -- save React DOM. Okay, now we need to tell our form, hey, we want to handle the submit. So we're going to say form on submit, and instead of putting it in quotes, we're going to put it in curly braces. Because we're using React classes, we have access to functions inside that class. So we are going to say create feedback. And up here, we are going to do our create feedback. And you know what? I don't want to do it on a submit. I want to do it, oh yeah, I do. I want to do it on a submit. And down here, we're going to say type equals submit. And we want to do that so our browser knows, hey, we want to submit the form when this button is clicked. And then we're going to come up here and we are going to say const const student ID is equal to React DOM dot find DOM node. So basically, hey, just like we did with jQuery with an ID, we're going to use the find DOM node. And we are going to find this dot refs dot student ID. Well, hey, we didn't attach student ID, right? We didn't tell it that this form field is student ID. So let's do that. We're going to say ref equals, and ref is going to pass us an element, and we want that element to be this dot student ID equals EL. So we're going to attach those two together. And then we're going to do the same thing up on our message. So we're going to do that, and we're going to call it this dot message. And then we are going to comment this out for just 1 second. I'm curious to see what happens. I want to console.log out my this dot student ID, and we're going to see what happens, right? Because we want to make sure our create feedback is working before we go too far. So we're going to go back in here, we're going to refresh, and we have an error. And the error that we have is create feedback is not defined. So let's go back in here. We have our create feedback. What we need to do is say this dot create feedback. Hey, look in this current class. Look in this app. Okay, refresh it. And we have an undefined, and then we have our form control. So let's dump back in here and say this dot student ID dot value. And let's see if that works. Let's go in here. Cannot read value of undefined. Of course it can. Okay, that was a mistake I made. We don't want the parentheses here because we don't want that code to run until we submit the code. So when we put the parentheses in there, it was running that console log immediately. Okay, so let's do ABC and hit save feedback, and the page refreshes. So React is no different than anything else. It still has a form. How do we prevent that from happening? How do we prevent it so when I hit save back, it doesn't refresh the page on us when I type in ABC and hit save feedback? Prevent default. So in order to prevent default, I need to pass in the event here, and we are going to event.prevent default. And let's see if that works. So we're going to refresh, we're going to do ABC, we're going to hit save feedback, and hey, our page didn't refresh. That's a win. Yay! Different errors, but we have errors. Okay, so it says cannot read student ID of undefined. And what I think is happening here is we really do need to read, we do need to use this find DOM node. And the reason for that is we have just a reference to it. We don't actually have the contents of what is typed in there. So we're going to, in here, say this dot student ID, and then we're going to get the value of the student ID. And then we are going to console log out our student ID. So basically, hey, go to the DOM, find this thing that we called student ID, and get the value of it, which is similar to what we do in jQuery, just a little different syntax. Okay, we're going to refresh. We're going to do ABC. We're going to hit save feedback. And it says cannot read property student ID of undefined. Okay. What did I do wrong? So let's look. Our student ID in our form field has the reference attached to it. It's called student ID. We gave it that element. We want the value from it. student ID, this student ID, it's referenced Okay, we're gonna go the old school way and just make this a string. Cannot read student ID if undefined. Can it read that though? No, it cannot. Oh, because this needs refs. Oh. Someone's watching the live stream right now and going, idiot, how did you miss that? Okay, so what was happening is we have to use different syntax up here because we want access to this. So because we want access to the whole class, we basically have to do this arrow syntax instead of defining it like a traditional function. I know that's super in depth. I know that doesn't make a ton of sense now. Joey will be diving into that the last 2 weeks. The important thing is it's working. Yay! Yay. So we're close. All we want to do is get this saving into the database, right? Do want to take 1 second to say, remember when we started Express? Just think back for a second. We set up Sequelize, and there were a bunch of different files, and we had the model, and we had to do a fetch and get the interface. You're going through that all over again. So even though it might not be clicking yet, imagine how it felt when I came back after Gus had taught everything, and all of a sudden you were like, wait, I get it, right? That moment will come again. You just got to power through it. And I promise I will take a break and make sure everyone gets caught up, even if it means taking an hour just to get task saving into the database, because React is going to get progressively more and more cool, just like Meteor is. Okay, so we just want to get our stuff saving into the database, then we'll take a break, and then we'll try and get everyone caught up to this point. No man, woman, or anything in between left behind. All right? So we're going to copy this. We are going to say message. We're going to say message. We're going to change our code down here. I lost it already. We are going to just call this message and clear out this code because that's what's working. So let's run with it. Okay, so let's console log out our message as well and refresh, and we do a test, and we save feedback, and our test message comes out. So now we know we have access to it. One last step we have to do. So in here, instead of doing our fetch call to our API like we normally would, what we're going to do is we are going to just feedback dot insert. Hey, that looks like Mongo syntax. What do we want to insert? We want to insert our student ID, and we want to insert our message. And we also want to insert, what else did we do? A timestamp. That's a new date. Okay. Now in fetch, we would do our create, or our post. So let's refresh in here. We're going to do our message as hello world and our student ID as ABC. And we're going to hit save feedback. And hey, that showed up in the table. Well, why did that show up in the table? We just did our create. I would expect that to be in the database, but we didn't send any data back from the database. Well, because of the magic of Meteor and React, it realized that something new is in the database and went, I'll update your interface for you. You already told me that feedback is a collection. I'm already looking at that collection. I'll send that to React. And React goes, oh, you have some new information for me? I'll render that out for you. So now we don't have to do a find, we don't have to send the data back. It's just coming back from the database. And React is automatically updating that for us. So one last thing I want to do before we go on break is I want to clear out those form fields. So I'm hoping that this is going to work. I don't know that it actually is, but there's one way to find out. We're going to set the value equal to empty strings, kind of similar to how we do it in jQuery. We're going to refresh. We're going to do a test and save feedback. It cleared it out for us. And if we scroll down, it's in the table. So I know it's a lot to wire together. We're going to take a break. We're going to try and get everyone caught up here. When we come back from break, I'm going to walk through all the code I already did. We're not going to do any new code until everyone's on the same page, everyone's following it, and we're going to connect it all together. All right?
I'm so glad you can read our expression.
I'm sorry you guys are lost. We will get everyone caught up, I promise. Let's take a 15-minute break, be back at 7:35. I will walk through all the code, and then we will work on getting everyone caught up. All right, we are going to dive back in. As promised, I'm not going to do anything new. I'm just going to talk through the commands that I run, what it's all doing, and then we're going to try and get all of you to do it. Okay, so let's fast forward all the way back to 5:30. Rewind. Rewind. Let's fast forward. Program's done, guys. Aren't you excited? You're masters at Meteor. You got everything that I just taught you with no problems. Isn't it amazing?
We're so smart. We should take stuff.
Okay, so
No visible problems.
the first thing we did is we ran this command, curl install Meteor *sh. We copied that from the Meteor website. It doesn't matter where we ran that. It's just installing Meteor on our entire computer. Okay, the next step we did was we did a CD into our desktop sandbox, right? And the whole point of that was just to get in the right folder because we're about to make a new folder for our new project. Then we ran Meteor create -- React and then our project name. And what that did is that created the new folder for us. And it got all the Meteor dependencies installed. It also got React installed for us, which is just really nice. It created all the files. Now we're good to go.
That project name is feedback.
Yes.
Wait a minute, Meteor create .react
-- -- React.
dash and React.
It's up here. Meteor create -- React, just not with a capital M.
Oh, you're putting it on there, okay.
I heard you guys. I know you like your documentation when you leave, so I'm creating it for you. And I will comment out all of these as well. Okay, now we need to do one more thing. Before we jump in, we need to CD into our project name folder, right? So we called it feedback. Let's call it feedback here. Now we needed a couple things to get started. We needed Bootstrap, so we.
Before you move on.
Yeah.
During this process here, there was a point where you stopped the Meteor server from running and then you restarted it.
Yep.
Where was that?
What we did is we ran Meteor and then we went to the browser and saw if our project was running.
Oh, okay.
Then we said, so open in browser. And then we said, right.
Yeah.
Then we said, okay, hey, we need some more dependencies. So we hit Control C to stop the server. And then we said, okay, what do we need to add? We need to add Bootstrap. So we Meteor npm install -- save, and we said Bootstrap. And that was specifically going to NPM, the big world of all of NPM. That's not just Meteor specific. But then what we also did is we said, hey, we also need SAS. But Meteor has its own version of SAS that does all the file watchers and gets everything up and running for us. So instead of Meteor npm install there, we did Meteor add. And that means that it's just a Meteor specific package. And we said 47 SCSS. 47 is the name of the author who created this package, and SCSS is the name of it. Okay.
And then after that, you restarted the server?
Then we did Meteor to start the server.
Okay.
That's it. That's all we did in the terminal. Okay. No, that seemed like a lot more. We're going to do a couple more setup steps, and then we're going to go through the meat and potatoes. Okay. And by go through, I mean the steps we already did. I'm not doing anything new, I promise. Okay, so in our code, what I did is I deleted out any JSX files in the UI except app.jsx. We don't need them, not using them. And then in app.jsx, I took out the imports for those files because we weren't using them. Then I went to imports API and deleted out the file that was in there as well. We weren't going to use that one. And I created a new one called feedback.js.
So it yelled at me when I got rid of links.
As long as there's something in the API folder, it will run. So it yelled at you when you got rid of links, but when you create feedback, it will stop yelling at you.
Can I just change the name and then change the?
You can. So in here,
Because it didn't like it when I made the feedback one and deleted links. It was like, it's crashing. That's what mine says.
we'll go through it one by one. I want to plow through the whole thing, everything that I did, and then we'll go around the room and get everyone caught up.
Was there a specific reason why you deleted those other JSX files?
Because we weren't going to use them.
Okay, so if we just don't delete them, it's no big deal. It's just
Yep.
makes our file list longer.
Yep.
Okay.
The first thing I did was I imported Mongo, and I imported Mongo from Meteor/Mongo. So that's something that's built into Meteor. We didn't have to install it. It was just in there. And this is in the imports API feedback, because what I'm doing is I'm creating my models that we want to use in our API. Even though we didn't really make an API, Meteor did all of that for us. We do need to tell Meteor, hey, I'm creating this feedback folder, this feedback collection, and that's going to come from Mongo, and it's going to be called feedback. And then we export it so we can use it elsewhere. Okay, but because we imported it, we need to tell our server that we're going to use that collection as well. So what we did is in our server folder, we went to the main.js and we imported feedback. So now the server knows, hey, feedback's out there, I can use that. That's the only thing we had to do on the server. We didn't write any other server-side code.
When you did the importation,
Mhm.
was that code generated or you typed that out manually?
I had to write that out. And so what I did is I called it feedback, but then all I had to do was pass in the file path,
Okay.
right? And so if we look, we went one folder up because we were in server. So we went one folder up to imports, and then we buried down into API and feedback. Okay, that's it. That's all the server-side code we had to do. Now we have one more setup task that we have to do. What we did is we opened up client, and this file, main.scss, was called main.css. We renamed that from main.css to main.scss. So we made that a Sass file. Now, because we Meteor added 47:SCSS, Meteor goes, oh, that's a Sass file. Great. Use any Sass that you want. You don't need to run a file watcher. You don't need to have it running in the background. You don't need it in another terminal. I'll take care of it all because this file extension is SCSS and because you Meteor had that Sass package. So what we did in here is we did an @import. That @import is Sass syntax. And what we said is, hey, import node modules, bootstrap, SCSS, basically go to the NPM, right? NPM node package manager, go to the node modules, what we installed, and pull in that bootstrap code. Now we have all of our projects set up done. We have our collection created. We have our server importing our API. We have bootstrap installed. We have Sass installed. The only thing that we need to do here is now build our app.
Max,
Yes.
what is a collection?
A collection.
Yeah, Mongo.collection.
Oh, we're in trouble. Okay.
Yeah.
Not for you specifically. Mongo collection is the equivalent to a SQL table.
Okay.
So when you hear collection is a table, and then a document is like a row in SQL. So Mongo has collections, which are tables, and then rows are documents. And then the key would be the column. You guys did do Mongo, right?
No.
Gus did an office hours one weekend, and that's when the app got switched over to Mongo. So I felt like maybe somebody should mention that we don't really know Mongo.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Do you know the differences between Mongo and SQL?
Mongo's supposed to be better. I mean, you're showing us.
Okay. Please wait while I scream into a pillow that I don't have. I'm sorry, I apologize. That I thought was covered in the curriculum. So Mongo, SQL stands for standard query language, right? But it also is used as structured query language. And there's a big argument on what it actually stands for, and there is a proper answer, but you will often hear people confuse the two of them and call it structured query language. SQL, whatever variety of SQL, right? Microsoft SQL, Postgres, MySQL, all of them are very structured. So you can't just create something to throw in the database. You need the columns predefined, and you need the data types on those columns predefined. So if you're going to say, hey, that's a string, you're going to say that's a varchar of 255, right? That length, that is okay. And if you do a timestamp, you're going to say that's a date time. And if you do a number, you have to tell the database it's storing a number. That is, you store it in a table. You have your columns, which are a certain data type, and then all the data that you're putting in would be independent rows. Mongo's a little different. Mongo goes, hey, you got a JavaScript object, give me your JavaScript object. And you go, well, how do you know? I don't care, just give me your JavaScript object, we'll shove it in there. And so in Mongo, the first thing I did was I created my collection, right? I created my table, so to speak, and I just so happened to call my table feedback, my collection feedback. Now Mongo is like, that's all I need to know. Shove your data in me. And so what happens is we go to our app.jsx. Don't look at any of the other code, just this line, just line 13. We do a feedback.insert. Just like we did message.create using Sequelize, this is straight up Mongo. We're not using any ODM here. We're writing a Mongo query straight up because Mongo is written and based in JavaScript. So what we do is we do an insert here, and we're inserting a document, right? The equivalent of a row. And what are we inserting? We're inserting 3 different keys and their values. The first key we're inserting is student ID, which would be like a column, message, another column, and timestamp, new date. And that's the row that we're inserting. And the keys values are new date, whatever the value of message is, which we defined up here, and whatever the student ID is, which we defined up here. So that's now in our database. That is a document with key value pairs that is sitting in our collection as a document. And all a document is a JavaScript object.
But you mentioned
the value of the key, right? So just like a JavaScript object where you have the key and the value, you have the key and the value in JSON, in Mongo as well. So we could rewrite this code as student ID, and message. Here is the key, and then the value of the key is this student. What is student equal to? It's equal to this long thing to pull the value out of the text field. We just can use shorthand here because JavaScript's like, I got it. You're calling it student ID. We have a variable called student ID already, so we can just use that and copy it in. So I'll leave both of them in there so you can see both varieties of it, but it's doing the exact same code.
So then you just creating a new value, right?
I'm creating essentially a new row in the database, but because it's Mongo, we call it a document.
I think she meant the new date.
Oh, the new date. This is a value. That is a value in the key timestamp that's going into our document when we insert it into the collection of feedback.
Question, if you leave that as message and you have const message, is that gonna mess something up when we try to run it?
So no, that's exactly what we want it to do. We're getting the value from the text field, and that value is now going to be in the variable called message. And now we want to save that into the database.
Okay, so we could also say student ID, and still leave the const student ID and the const message in, it'll still run fine.
Yes. Now, if you
Okay.
took this out, it wouldn't work.
Okay.
And it wouldn't work because it's going, what student ID?
Oh.
Or it would get to message and it'll go, okay, I get it. You want to put that in the key message. Great. Okay, now what's the content of that message? What's the value of that? And it goes, I don't know what message is. Please tell me what message is. So up here, we told it, hey, message, go get it and get the value of it. Okay, so
this, you're just creating tables right now.
I'm creating rows right now. The tables I'm creating in here.
You're creating a row in which you have other values for the columns in that row.
Correct.
Okay, is this a good time to update our notes?
So I'm going to go through all of this code only because I'm going to comment through all of this code tonight. So you'll have access to this. Yeah. Okay. So we did all the setup, and I think that's where it went really fast.
Still have that comment out.
Thank you. The setup I know went really fast, but when we look at this, we have our entire front end doing create and read in 77 lines of code. We have no API, our API is hidden away, right? We just told it, do the collection, that's it. So imagine back to the chat room app, how many lines of code did it take? And in 2 different projects to just send one message up to the server and have it show up, right? So we're doing all of this in one file. So while it went fast because we were doing all the setup, when we focus in on just this one file, I'm hoping that it's going to be easier to read.
And like Jaquay said, we don't have to worry about all the different dependencies. We don't have to go out on the web and worry about what we might not have brought in and what's not properly.
Exactly. We didn't have any link import. We didn't have to get the CSS. We're not relying on a CDN. We didn't have to pull in jQuery. We didn't have to do a fetch request. We didn't have to set up body parser on the back end. All of that was just handled for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through these lines. Now, what we do up here is we say, hey, we need some things from React. The 2 things we need from React is React itself and the component. Okay. We also need this thing called React DOM because we need to be able to go there and pull some values out. There is a more efficient way of doing what we just did, but this is the most jQuery-like, so I left it. Joey will get into state and how to pull values out of state and all that kind of stuff. Okay, we need 2 more things from the database. We need this thing called with tracker. And what that is Meteor trying to help us out and making it easier for us to pull Mongo data in from our database and dump it into React for us. So that's what this with tracker is doing. Now we need one more thing. We need feedback. Where do we need feedback? We need it from our API, because we're going to do some API-y things with our feedback, right? We're going to create a new one. Okay, that's it. That's all the imports that we need. Okay, now we have 3 functions that are running, and that's it. We have our create feedback, we have our render, and then all the way down here, we have our with tracker. So basically, let's start at the bottom. With tracker is just saying, hey, what data do you want? Because whatever data you want, I'm going to dump it into your React component. I'm going to give you access to it with this.props. Yes.
I have a question. Can you scroll back up to where you said we're doing the API feedback? So is that over here in imports API feedback.js?
That is exactly what we're pulling in.
Okay, then so when we put it into the code over here, we don't have to say .js.
It's optional.
It is optional.
It is optional. We can put a .js there and it's fine.
Okay.
Because we're in JavaScript land, it assumes that we're trying to pull in a JavaScript file.
Okay. That's good to know.
Okay, so we're going to come down here. We're just going to get, yep.
Is the with tracker similar to the fetch method with Node.js where you have to like do the body, JSON.string body.
It's similar. So the reason why we have to do this is React isn't designed to connect directly to a database. And so if we tried to run this feedback.find.fetch in our code, it would work the first time. But remember how it was reactive to what we put in? So when we created a new event, it just showed up in the table immediately. We didn't have to do .html. We didn't have to get the ID. We didn't have to do any of that. React isn't used to getting data from a database dumped directly in. So if we tried to do this feedback.find.fetch, it would work fine the first time and it would get the data, but it wouldn't be reactive. It wouldn't automatically update the data for us. So Meteor has us covered and creates this function called with tracker for us that basically is tracking the data. And when it gets new data, it's going to hand it off to React. And React is going to go, oh, I'm getting new data. This is great. Thank you. I now know to go update. But if we try to do this feedback.find.fetch directly in our React code, React would run it once and be like, that's it. I'm not used to getting new data. So that's why we use this with tracker. And what this with tracker is going to do is it's going to say, okay, what do you want to track in the database? And so we tell it, hey, return this thing back called feedback. And what does feedback equal? It equals feedback.find. Feedback.find is a Mongo function. So feedback.find is going to go out to our Mongo collection. It's going to find everything, and it's going to return it back to us. But it's going to return it back to us in this weird format. And we're like, could you put that in an array for us? Because once it's in an array, we can loop over it. And so that's what this .fetch is doing, is it's dumping it out into an array. Okay, and then the last thing with tracker needs to know, where do you want me to send this data? What's tracking this? And so what we do is we say, hey, dump that into app. Okay, so now we're gonna come back up into our app. And we're not gonna get into create feedback quite yet. We'll get there in 1 second. So we're gonna drop down to our render, and our render is gonna run and it's gonna say, okay, what would you like to render out to the front end? Okay, we want a div class name container. We're in Bootstrap land. Hey, this looks familiar. Okay, and we want to do an H1 welcome to Meteor. You know what, we can probably get rid of that. We probably don't need that anymore. Okay, and on submit is familiar, just the syntax is a little different. So what are we going to do? We're going to say this.create feedback. So instead of putting it in quotes, React puts it in the curly braces. And so create feedback is going to run this code up here. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Hey, all of this looks very familiar. That looks like straight up HTML, except it uses class name instead of class. By golly, that is straight up HTML. And if we compare that to our message app, we'll notice that it's using the same code. Okay, all of this is still the same. We're going to drop down here. The only thing we did is we put a ref on it. The ref's like an ID in jQuery. We just need a way to hook into that to pull out the value. So instead of using jQuery, we're using React DOM to pull out those values. So that's why we're using that ref there. Okay, now we're going to drop down. We have 2 more bits of code here. We have our div class row, and we have our table, and we make our table just like normal. Now we have our this.props.feedback. Whoa, this.props. Okay, that's something React is passing in as a property. Well, what's this feedback? This feedback is getting passed in right from here. And that feedback is an array of everything in our Mongo collection. So every document in our Mongo collection should use the right verbiage. Okay, so now we're gonna map. Map isn't special to React. Map isn't special to, it's just JavaScript. So what do we want to do? We want to iterate over that array. So every piece of feedback is going to loop through the array and come in as feedback. Okay, and what do we want to do? We want to return that back because we want that to show up in the interface. What do we want to return back? Just this table row. We want a new row for every piece of feedback that's in the database. Okay, Now, what do we want in there? Well, we're going to use these curly braces, just like we did in EJS with the arrow and the percent sign. All we're saying is, hey, dump in whatever the value of feedback.studentID is, and dump in whatever the value of message is. And what's going to happen for every piece of feedback, because we're iterating over that array, we are going to return out another table row. Okay, so I lied. We now have 2 more pieces to handle. Up here, we're going to create our feedback, right? So when they submit the form, we need to handle that. So what we're going to do is event.prevent default. Browser, I'm smarter than you. Don't submit it. Don't refresh it. I'll take care of it. Okay, now we grab student ID and message out. And how do we do that? We go to our refs using React DOM, just like we would with jQuery, and we pull out the value. So student ID is now equal to whatever's in that text field, and message is whatever's in the other text field. Okay, great. Now what do we want to do with that? Well, let's go feedback. Whoa, feedback, where's this coming from? Well, feedback is coming in from our API file. What's our API file? It's just a Mongo collection. So what are we going to do? We're going to insert. Insert is another Mongo command. So we're going to insert. What data would we like to insert? The student ID. Well, what student ID? It's defined up here. Okay, and now we also want to create something called message. Well, what would you like message to be equal to? We would like it to be equal to this message. This message matches this message, so it's going to be the value. Now we need one more thing. Timestamp new date. Okay, throw in the current time, just dump it in. Okay, clear out the values, just like we did in jQuery. When we submit the form, we want to, clear it out. Okay, we're missing something here. What are we missing? We're missing jQuery going back to the div, going back to the table, and updating the table with the data. But because we have some magic going on here with Meteor, Meteor is going to put this into the feedback table. It's going to save it in there, and then it's going to come down here to this tracker code and go, oh, there's something new in the table. Would you like me to go find it? Sure. So it finds it. The tracker dumps it into React, and React goes, oh, I have new data. Well, I don't need to be told to go update the interface. I'm constantly watching this.props.feedback. And because I'm watching that, there's no reason why I can't go in and just dump out your extra table row.
I like Mongo.
You like Meteor.
Yes, Meteor. Well, Meteor, is this not?
This is using Mongo.
Using Mongo.
You can use Mongo with Express and not get any of this magic.
Okay, I like Meteor, yes.
So Meteor is what's making this Mongo magic all work together.
So you're basically creating a database right now. How do you connect it to Docker?
So Meteor runs it for you. They go, you're creating an app, you probably need a database. We'll set up the database server for you.
This is a lot more intuitive. It just, even though there are pieces that we're not, coding out directly like we did with SQL, this is.
So it's important to know SQL because there are queries that you'll run on the job that get very complex and take minutes or even hours to run. So it's important to know SQL. It's important. No SQL is also the name of Mongo. It's the category of Mongo. It's NO SQL. Pun not intended there. Sorry. So it's important to have the knowledge of SQL. It's important to. There are times that SQL databases outperform Mongo because SQL is more structured. So I use SQL all day in my day job. I do not use Mongo at all. We started with Mongo. We ran into some performance and organization issues with Mongo, and we ended up switching back to SQL. So it's important to know that. It's also important to understand the REST concepts, right? Because you guys had already played around with APIs, you had used the New York Times, you had done your fetch requests, but it's important to know how to write your own REST API because 97% of the internet is based off of REST, right? It's all those gets and the puts. We're now moving into the magic of it. Look, we'll handle the database for you. We'll get all of that set up. Look over here, and okay, here's your data, right?
And it's nice to see where things can be automated. I think that this is great because we've done all of the hand coding and, like you said, using SQL where every little piece had to be programmed in, and then going to this where we can just put in like 2 or 3 lines of code and then it creates it for us.
Yes, yes. Okay, so that's it. Oh, go ahead.
Do we have to do anything with the date, like with moment?
When we, yeah, if we did a new TH here, called timestamp, and then did a TD here, and we did timestamp, and we went in here. Of course it is. And we go back in here. It gets very cranky with us. And why it gets cranky with us, it says objects are not valid as a React child. So what we could do is we can do, the timestamp is getting stored as an object. It's not getting stored as a string. So when we try and dump it out, it's like object. I don't know what an object is. So what we can do here is we can do a toString method and refresh, and we get this horrendous thing.
There it is.
So
It doesn't look so bad. It's there.
Yeah, it's real time.
it's there, yeah. And it does have the proper thing saved, but who knows 1855?
At this point, we've seen worse.
So-
Fine with
You
that.
have to subtract 12, it's not
Okay.
acceptable.
I'm breaking my promise. We're adding one more new thing.
Sorry.
Whoa.
How are we going to install Moment?
Meteor.
Oh, Meteor has it.
Install -a.
Oh.
Meteor doesn't have it. We don't care if Meteor has it. We care if NPM has it. So we're going to install Moment,
And that's what-
Moment.js, just Moment. That looks right. Okay, now we didn't tell it to install in the front end. We didn't tell it to install in the back end. We don't care. We're just going to go and import it. Import Moment from Moment. Great. We imported Moment. We installed Moment. Let's go use Moment. So instead of toString, I'm going to go Moment. I'm going to pass in my timestamp, and I'm going to format it as L, which is a format that's built in. And I'm going to go here, and before I can even refresh, my timestamp shows up. Great, we did Moment.
Wow. How come you didn't have to put the dots up in the code like you did with the other ones?
Because it's coming from an NPM package.
Oh, because it's coming from, okay.
These are coming from our files, and we have to do the Meteor / here because that actually came in with Meteor add instead of NPM install.
Got it.
Whenever you pull a package in that's coming from a Meteor add, you have to do the Meteor /. All right, homework, get this working, go.
So like, I mean, this will run on any device.
On anything that you have Meteor installed on.
Oh, I mean, but with Docker, you don't have to install it.
So you would deploy this just like you would have to install Node wherever you're going to run Node, or Express wherever you're going to run Express. This is all running server side. But if an end user tried to hit this, they wouldn't need Meteor installed because they would be just going to a website. So the Meteor server is going to serve our React code to the end user. And the React code is going to run on their browser fine because it's all JavaScript. So the short answer is you would need Meteor installed on your server, but none of the end users would need Meteor installed. All right, no one push, no one push. Do this quickly before anyone pushes. Okay, our codes, the codes in GitHub. I'm gonna stop the screen share. Anyone who needs that link can click into it and see my code, or they can just go on GitHub if that's easier. I'm also going to end the live stream, and then we're here for the next 15 minutes to help you get this running.